How do we lead well and thrive in uncertain times? Our guest today is Larry Robertson. He is an award-winning author of 3 books on entrepreneurship, creativity, and leadership. And we're going to talk right now about his newest book, which is Rebel Leadership, which is already a 2-time award-winning book. So we're excited about that. And it only released in June of 2021. So really, really awesome. We're going to talk about Rebel Leadership. We're going to talk about what drives innovation, adaptability. Can I even say it? But it's so important now in these uncertain times that we're going through, as everything's just changing around us. And so stay tuned. So we've got a great show planned for you here today. Now, before I go any further, I do want to say that this podcast is brought to you by my coaching and training company, which is Leaders of Transformation. And so if you are a leader that wants to be better, do better, and make a greater impact this year, then I encourage you to go on leadersoftransformation.com/coaching. You can learn a little bit more about the coaching that I provide. We can talk about, you can schedule a free consult with me. We can talk about your goals, your opportunities, and what it's going to take for you to be the leader of transformation that you are capable of being. So I encourage you to do that. leadersoftransformation.com/coaching. All right, let's bring Larry on. Larry, welcome to Leaders of Transformation. We're excited to have you here today.
Nicole, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you for your book. I really enjoyed reading your book. You know, anything that says rebel in it, and of course leadership, I'm all in. I'm like, what's that about? But you tell us a little bit about why you titled it that in particular.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm actually surprised that more people don't ask it, although they clearly are attracted in some way to the title. I think of rebel leadership as a single term, even though it's made up of 2 words. And really what it represents is the best of what attracts us to both things. The rebel being, in my mind, not that extreme risk taker or the person who's just, rolling dice on everything, and sometimes in a thoughtless way, or towards a single end goal versus a sustained way of doing things, but instead the innovator, the person who's open on an ongoing basis, the person who is willing to rethink even what they knew or know well, or how they do things. So it's that rebel side, right? And the leadership side isn't just the person who stands at the top of a hierarchy or behind the podium and tells people what to do. It's the leader who creates an environment where everyone can lead, because really that leads to the most powerful kind of leadership. So rebel leadership is both a combination of those 2 things, that innovative, creative side and that leading in a way that builds leadership culture, but it's also specifically aimed at the times we're in. And so that's why the subtitle of the book is How to Thrive in Uncertain Times, because in uncertain times, those are the qualities and the characteristics we need most, not just of the person who's officially the leader, but of everybody in an organization.
Well, and I think that everyone is a leader, at some level. First of all,
Agreed.
We lead ourselves, and then we lead others. And, if we do that well, then we might even get promoted if we're working within a company to formally lead others, but we're leading others all the time. And so I love that. And I love the idea of rebel, because it's the disrupting, right? It's like this podcast is all about interviewing people that disrupt for good. And so this idea of disrupting the status quo, and as much as we're in kind of these uncertain times right now, but the truth is, aren't all times in some way uncertain? People that assume and say, well, it's always this way and we're always going to, move along this trajectory, those are the ones that tend to get left behind, because as Buckminster Fuller would say, we're always, everything's changing. The only thing that's constant, it's really change. So I love that. But leading forward in this particular time, which is kind of an unusual situation where there's so many factors that are coming in, how do you, where do we start with this journey of leading forward while we're disrupting and change, and everything's disrupting around us?
Right. It's again, a wonderful question. I want to go back to the beginning of what you just said, that this is really a very, I think of it as an individualized human ability to not only lead and want to lead, and you started with ourselves, right? To lead ourselves to somewhere we want to arrive, to somewhere better, out of a place we'd like to exit from. It's all part of the name of your podcast, the name of your coaching business. It's about transformation. And if we're not open to the idea of looking at things anew, even when we don't have to, then it's very, very hard to transform. You know, a lot of people, and this goes to your question of how can we begin? What can we do here? Most people think about transformation, innovation, creativity as things that you turn to when you have a problem. And really, they are practices. They're things that you have to be thinking about and doing all the time so that when you most need to call on them, whether you're looking for an opportunity or you're trying to deal with a challenge, you're already in the practice of thinking that way, because all of them are anchored in how you think, but they're anchored in something else too. And this gets right to the heart of your question. Where are you going? When you transform, when you try to lead people or yourself in a particular, where is it you're trying to end up? And so I think the most important thing to know as you go into that is, who are you? That I call it, what is your soul and how do you know your soul? And I don't mean necessarily this deep internal reflection on who you are, although for some people that's exactly how they get at it. I mean this sense of your identity, and importantly, your identity in the context of what you do and how what you do connects to and impacts others. That's the kind of soul I'm talking about. Because what I find as I interview the most successful, not just leaders, but organizations, cultures of leadership, is that the individuals in those organizations, no matter where they fall on the hierarchy, they have a keen sense of their identity in the context of what they do and how that impacts and connects to others. And if you think about it, you can be so much more impactful when you are thinking in those terms, because you're bringing the best of who you are in that context, in theory, to bring the best to the people who are also in that context. So it's that sense of soul, and knowing that soul matters most is the one thing, the one asset that every leader of the hundreds of leaders that I've interviewed points to as the thing they can rely on most, the thing that they turn to most often, especially when things are uncertain, and the thing that they try to help others find in themselves at whatever level.
When you talk about soul, I think about identity and purpose and all of that. And you know, I think it's hard, and it's such a good point that you make, because I think it's hard to lead others well and to bring all of what you have to offer to the table if you don't know what that is. Like, it's kind of a crapshoot otherwise. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm going to bring whatever it is that I have today, and hopefully that's my genius. But if you don't know that, and I think it was your book that I've read a lot of books over the last month or two. I think it was your book that actually said that, what is it, 70% of leaders don't know their identity and their purpose.
Yes.
And it's like, wow, to think about, these are not even people that are starting out. You're talking about the leaders that you've interviewed. They don't know who they are. And I think that's a real, that has been a trigger, that's been a disruptor in the last 2 years of people not being clear. That's why I've started to talk more and more about this idea of soul and identity and purpose, because if we don't know that, how can we possibly bring the best? And how can we also stay grounded in the midst of all of these changing things, right? So it's like, we have to have a point of reference to start from. And I know you also talk about, somewhere in the book, you talk about power sources and all of that. Can you kind of expand a little bit on that concept for those of us that are kind of just really in that space of like, what does it mean to really operate from our purpose and our identity?
Sure. So let me draw on several points that you made there. And the first is the distinction between soul and purpose. So at least in the context of rebel leadership, and I mean the book, but I also mean in the context of having looked at those organizations and those leaders who've actually been thriving in not just the past 2 years, but the past 20. They've been thriving in this increasing uncertainty. There's a distinction between soul and purpose that I sensed as I looked at these organizations, as I talked to these leaders. So when I speak of soul, I'm talking about at the individual level. Who are you What is your identity in the context of what you do and how it connects to others? Distinguishing that from purpose, which is something that centers a group. So I add the word shared purpose to it. And in the best situations, it's a purpose that's crafted by everybody who's trying to pursue it, who's trying to evolve it over time. It's not just crafted by them, but it's used every day. It's a litmus test for what they do and where they're going and how well are they doing. For those who don't do it, it's a reckoning. So there's this importance of, if you don't know yourself in the context of where you're trying to lead or where you're trying to contribute to leadership, how can you possibly be a good steward of creating that shared purpose or pursuing it over time? So I think that's really important to think about, is that it's the individual, but it's also the group at the same time. When I talk about power source in the book, it's saying those two first things are critically important: to know that soul matters most, and to know what your identity is in the context of what you do, to understand shared purpose and to actually activate it, to use it as a tool every day, in every decision, every action by every single person every day, is how these successful organizations are doing it. But that really is your focus in the immediate. This power source idea is that there's something deeper driving you that allows you to keep drawing on this reserve as you adjust your purpose, as you shape your identity in the context of what you do. And I think it's easiest if I give you a couple of examples. So this all evolves out of an idea that Peter Drucker had and used. He would be asked often as a management guru, which organizations are going to be the most successful in the future? Which organizations that are successful now are going to last over time? And he would boil his answer down to a single question: what business are you in? But the distinction is that he would ask that question 5 layers deep. It's kind of borrowing from an old Japanese philosophy of manufacturing in the 1980s, where they would ask the 5 layers of why. And the point of Drucker asking that questions 5 times over was, your first answer is kind of the obvious answer. This is the business we're in. By the time you get to the 5th level, you're really at the core of something deeper that's driving what you do. So as an example, Airbnb went through this exercise, used this Drucker question and the 5 layers to figure out who they were. This was about 3 years ago, and it was pre-pandemic. And they arrived at their answer, their power source being belong anywhere. Now, if you think about that, it doesn't dictate a specific purpose. It doesn't tell you even what business you're in or what course you should follow. It says, this is the thing that we draw from as we shape our purpose, as we shape our business plan, as we pursue things over time. Our goal is to create that belonging anywhere for our guests, for our hosts, for our employees, for our partners. And if we continue to have a sense of that, we are in a better position to shape and achieve our purpose over time, to know what our identity is in the context of what we do, because we realize there's this larger power source that we're continuously drawing from. So for Apple, design, at least under Steve Jobs, design was power for them. For the Grameen Bank, which led the charge in microlending, it was community is power. And so, for Walmart, it's live better, right? So we think of Walmart sometimes in terms of trying to be the retail giant, trying to have the lowest prices. If those things contribute to living better, then they're drawing off their power source in a powerful way. If that ever changes, the power source allows them to go in different directions. So there's really these combination of factors: knowing your soul, understanding and using your shared purpose actively, having that sense of this deeper thing that drives everything, everybody and the business, this power source. And then most importantly, bringing that together in a culture so that those things are priorities and those things are actionable every day. And everyone is not just expected, but empowered to contribute to each of them.
So I think about mission statements, purpose statements, values, mottos, taglines, what you're talking about, power source. So if someone's listening and they're saying, okay, this is great and I get it, how does all of this fit together? I find a lot of times we have so many different, and maybe it's, using different language, but it's similar concepts.
Yeah.
And then people get overwhelmed because they're like, okay, so I need to have all of these things figured out. And which do I communicate to my team? Which is the lead, if you will, on those? Do I get them to memorize our mission statement, or do I focus on a tagline? Or can you kind of help guide through that process of simplifying it down? Because I think there is power in simplicity.
Yes.
And not having too many things to try to remember, and different ways of saying basically the same thing.
Yep. We could go further than that. We could stretch the list out of things that people point to that, gee, I have to remember that, or I'm told that's critical, like know your why, Simon Sinek's know your why, or whatever it might be. So I'll give you a couple of quick and I think really powerful answers to that question. The first thing is that part of the reason there are so many of those things out there, part of the reason that it sometimes feels hard to remember which ones and what was that supposed to be and how am I supposed to use that, is that we're not using those things. So we create them one time if we do that, or we read about them one time, but we're not putting them into action. So that statistic that you referred to earlier of these, it's actually greater than 70% of these executives, these senior leaders who hold that title, who really don't have a sense, not just of their own individual purpose, they're not even sure of their organization's purpose, and they helped create it in many cases. And the reason is that things like purpose are alive. They're not fixed. Things like purpose have power when they're actually used. And things like purpose don't need to be remembered if they're being used and applied every day. And this is important, not just by the senior leader. So if an organization is actually playing with these core things, and to me, knowing who you are in the context of what you do, and knowing where your organization is trying to go, what your shared purpose is for existing, those are fundamental right there. Everything else you could call window dressing, but to go forward and to use them, to allow and expect everybody to play with them, to know that they'll need to be modified over time, to know that they need to respond to the changing conditions you're in, puts you in this zone of actually applying them and drawing the power out of them, and instead of trying to memorize them or going through a checklist, because they're not that. They're constantly moving, and the idea is to use them more like a compass to react to and then contribute to whatever the environment is you're operating every day. Your to-do list, your business plan, if we're talking about a year-long cycle, your strategy over several years, all of it. If it's not active, it is like a list, and there is no good answer to how to memorize it. It's really to boil it down to what's fundamental all the time, and then to make it active in everybody.
So what I'm hearing is that you have the centering focus, the centering thought, whatever it is, belong anywhere, right? That one there, it's so simple and yet so profound. Then you can have a yearly mission, you can have a 3 to 5 year goal, you can have all of those things, but it's around that piece. I know that for myself. It's like, when I think about make decisions on, do I take advantage of this opportunity or that opportunity? Does it help me to achieve this particular, like, this is I call it the mission, but it's like, this is the thing that I'm doing. And so everything needs to be moving towards that. Otherwise it doesn't make sense to do it. And so that's what you're talking about. It's like
to build on that, think about just one of the examples I gave you, belong anywhere. Let me just be raw about it. What the hell does that mean? It's purposeful, that it doesn't mean something so fixed that you're just executing a task. In fact, when I talk to people at Airbnb for this book and about Belong Anywhere, one of them, Melissa Thomas Hunt, who's the director of diversity, inclusion, and equity, she said, listen, I said, what does that mean in the context of your day-to-day? What does it mean for Airbnb? If you want to narrow it down for this year. And she said, that's not the important answer to get to. It's a North Star kind of thing. Those were her words. And so what's powerful about it is it asks you to say, not only is what I'm doing now, does that relate to Belong Anywhere, but also to ask, How does it draw power from that? How does it define what belong anywhere means in this moment? So really what it's promoting is this active thinking. It's this active thinking around what your soul is. It's this active thinking around purpose, but it's active thinking down to the specific actions you execute every day. And if you think about it, I don't want to be too extreme or heartless here, but we're not usually thoughtful about the majority of things we do in a day. And so the idea of these concepts and making them active is to say, be thoughtful about it, or not just be thoughtful, be open to what they might mean in this moment, which might be different than what they meant yesterday or last year, or when you wrote it down for the first time 5 years ago. Those things are changing all the time. One, because we're human beings. Two, because every organization is active. And three, because the uncertainty of these times is causing the pace of that change in meaning to be constant. So we need to always be coming back to say, where does purpose play a role today, right? What does belong anywhere mean in this moment? Not just in solving a problem, but in the new opportunities it's creating. So it's really about making that active. That is a terrifically impossible job for any one person. And so to create these cultures where everybody is asked to rise up and lead in their own way. And all that really means is to think about and make active that shared purpose. All it really means is to be conscious of your power source and what it might mean in this moment. You have to ask everybody to do that because the job is just simply too big. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, what sector you're in, what size of organization you are. The complexity of work these days is too big for any one leader. So you've got to make it collective in some way.
Got it. Yeah. So thinking about this is like, as maybe a quick exercise is if someone's listening and they're saying, okay, got it. I need to have that shared purpose. I need to have that power source. How do I create it?
Great question. So I'm going to answer that by sharing with you 5 more questions. Okay. And I was taught this so in my second book, The Language of Man, which was focused on creativity, I had the honor of interviewing MacArthur Fellows, and they're the winners of this so-called Genius Award for Creativity. And one of them, Deb Meyer, taught me this technique, this tool that she uses every single day. So not just when they're shaping their purpose, but how they enter a meeting, how they start a new project, how they check their progress along the way, how they onboard a new member of the team. And she calls it the 5 habits of the mind. And these are really simple, powerful tools that answer exactly what you're asking. They also help shape purpose and on and on and on. And they're these. The first question is, how do we know what we know? I mean, imagine inviting yourself to check your assumptions. It might take all of 30 seconds to say, we do know what we know. The facts we base that on are still relevant. We're on to the next thing. But this idea of being willing to check in and see if anything has changed is enormously powerful. So how do we know what we know? The second habit of the mind is there a pattern? Because sometimes when we ask, how do we know what we know? There's new information out there. We're not interested in the anomalies. We're interested in how the dots connect and where there's a pattern, because that's a powerful message either about opportunity or threat or whatever it might be. The third habit of the mind is there another way? Because there's always another way. So even when we question how we know what we know, even when we see a pattern, even when we ask what if, there's always another way to come back and look at that at the end. And the final habit of the mind is who cares? So it's this idea of tying what you're doing in any particular moment to some audience that actually is going to appreciate the value. They're going to resonate the purpose that you're pursuing. Whatever it is, it's connecting you to someone. So I would answer your question by saying, just having those 5 questions in your head, even if you do it individually, is one of the best ways to hone in on your purpose, even on your soul, or on what the challenges or opportunities are ahead of you, and bring clarity to those. I think they're enormously powerful habits, and they are supposed to be habits.
Yeah, and that brings me back to where you started when you talked about creativity and innovation is not just a thing that you do when you need to do it. It is a habit, is a practice of rebel leadership. It is a practice of doing things and not in the same old way because that's the way it's always been done, but actually, and you think about the companies that are leading right now, the companies that are innovating and moving and making a huge impact and are transforming their industries, those are the ones that have made this a practice of being in that conversation, to stand in the question and the 5 questions, to
Yes.
stand in those questions, to challenge the status quo. And so I love that. And as we go into this, and as the date of the recording, of course, it's the new year of 2022 and going into this, but it really applies to any time of year,
Anytime.
any year. It really is something that's fundamental. So I appreciate you sharing that. Now,
And Deb would argue that it applies to your everyday.
yes,
Right? It applies
yes.
to every component of it. And I'll add one quick thing to what you said. We tend to think about creativity in the rear view mirror. So we tend to think about the big thing that's going to come out the end, the solution, the new innovation, the whatever it is. Creativity is everything that happens before that. And so it's that pattern of being open and exploring possibility all the time that often results in those big solutions or transformations or innovations. But it's that practice that precedes it. It's that mindset you're building. That's really creativity. That's where the power comes from. So if you only turn to it when you have a problem situation, you're unlikely to have the result that you dream of or hope for.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, coming back to your book, just before we wrap up, I know you have different chapters that you talk about specific things. Is there anything that you want to highlight here that would be helpful? I mean, obviously, I would recommend our listeners and our viewers get a copy of your book, of course, Rebel Leadership, and it's on Amazon. And I'm a big fan of actually using Smile Amazon, by the way, so that when you are purchasing the same book that you would have purchased and paid the same price that you're going to purchase, wherever whether it's regular Amazon or Smile, but it actually, a portion goes to a charity that you've chosen. So I encourage people to do that, is to utilize Smile Amazon. But coming back to your book, so maybe talk a little bit about some of the things that we haven't talked about here, but to kind of tie this all together.
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So I'll say this because we've actually touched on a lot of the book here. Mm-hmm. The lessons of the book, from soul to leadership moving across the organization, which is tied to that shared purpose idea, culture, power source, all of that, are in the book set in the context of these uncertain times. And I think the key message around everybody knows there's uncertainty. Everybody's feeling it a little bit and often in the extreme. The real point to take away is that that's not going away. This is our new abnormal. It is not we're moving to the next status quo or, the next kind of normal around the corner. Things are going to continue to change in these odd ways and at this extreme pace ongoing. And the most reliable things for navigating through that and thriving in uncertain times turn out to be things like soul, like allowing leadership to move, making these things cultural. That's really what proves out across the most successful organizations in the past 20 years as being key. And it applies to everybody, every individual and every organization. So to accept that we're not going to exit these times anytime soon, I think is a really powerful tool in and of itself.
Yeah, and it's freeing, because I think when we are waiting for something to happen so that we can resume the status quo, or we can settle back in again, then what we're doing is we're not paying attention to the opportunity that's right in the now. And the opportunity that we have to innovate, to create, to learn, to grow, to work together, to collaborate, to see the opportunities around us. And so I think that's very wise. So thank you so much. I know time goes by really quick, but thank you for sharing what you did today. And I just encourage our listeners and our viewers, go get a copy of Rebel Leadership, as Larry unpacks these different concepts through his chapters. They're very clear and they're actionable. So if you're wondering, this is all great, but how do I do this? Get a copy of the book. He'll go through it with you. And I would also encourage you, and we'll make sure this is also in the show notes, is get even a copy of his previous 2 books, because it's a bit of it. We talked about it. Larry and I talked about it prior to this, it's a bit of a trilogy, if you will, in books. So the first one was A Deliberate Pause, Entrepreneurship in Its Moment in Human Progress. The second one was Language of Man, Learning to Speak Creativity. And then, of course, his most recent book, which is Rebel Leadership. All award-winning books, all excellent. So I highly encourage you to go get a copy of those books. As again, you can get them on Smile Amazon. You can also go to his website, lrspeaks.com. And this is all going to be in the show notes for you. So again, thank you so much, Larry. Final thoughts before we wrap up.
Well, I just thank you for that. And I want to thank you as well for this show. For those who are new to it, it is a really powerful way to dip yourself in a pool of thoughts and knowledge around leadership and actionable thoughts. And so I'm grateful to even contribute to it in a small way. I appreciate it, Nicole.
Oh, well, thank you. And I appreciate that. And yes, this is episode 410. So there are 409 other episodes all on the leadersoftrandsformation.com. And I really curate, my goal has always been to curate people that and information, knowledge that we can bring to the table from people that have done it, that are not, this is not theory, that Larry has certainly interviewed a lot of people, but this is also something he operates. He does this for a living, is consulting and so forth. And so, and has done it over many, many years. And so, yes, I want to have people on this show that are truly leaders that are creating transformation and can speak from experience and also, of course, from passion and insight. And so, hopefully we have, I think we've done it here for sure with you today. So. And we'll continue to do that as we go along. So again, thank you, Larry. Thank you to our listeners. I encourage you, leaders of transformation, take action. Take action on something that you heard today. Maybe it's just stopping and asking those 5 questions of yourself, and then going and getting a copy of Larry's book so that you can kick this year off, or whenever it is that you're listening to this, that you can read that information and use it, apply it in your own leadership situation. However, whether you're leading yourself as a solo entrepreneur or whether you're leading an organization of 5,000 people, either way, I promise you it will be valuable to you and highly insightful. So do that. We'd love to hear your stories. You can go on leadersoftrandsformation.com. Of course, you can follow us on social. We're all over social media as well. Of course, me personally as well. I'm on LinkedIn. You can follow me there as well as, all the other platforms and so forth. So we encourage you, let us know how this has helped you. If you have questions or comments, and even if you have topics, maybe we haven't covered something, or you want us to unpack something a little bit further that you think, hey, you know what? Can you talk about this? Because I would like to hear more about it. That is one of the benefits of this platform, is that I get the privilege of some pretty amazing people like Larry and like others that I can bring on this show and ask those questions where maybe you wouldn't have access to it, but because of having this platform, we get to have those that access. So if you have questions that you would like us to get answered by some of the top leaders in the world, let us know, and we will do our best to support you in that. So again, thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you next week on the Leaders of Transformation.